Well, we're living in turbulent times, and last year I was saying to Loz and Matt that I was planning to move back to Australia. So we had invested a whole year of time and resources in building our market in Sydney. Unfortunately, when COVID-19 came along, it changed all of our plans, and we had to quickly adapt, adjust, and respond to the new conditions of the world. So as we were here in Taiwan, we started to ask ourselves, what can we do differently? I had been operating my business online since 2012, but I really couldn't get it going online. And so in 2012, we moved to Sydney. And then in 2013, I started to attend what was BX networking, but it was, what was it used to be called, Loz? The one before? For networking. So I started to attend for networking in Parramatta. And what happened was I quickly grew a database of people. People started to know who I was. They started to understand what I was doing, and I started to get referrals. And so my business periodically still does business with those people I first met in 2013. So I still get referrals back from 2013, but I'm still doing webinars with you today. So it proves that you can start a relationship with what was for networking, which is now BX, and it can continue into the future. And so I know it really works for me. I was going to a lot of events last year, and we had a lot of fun and met a lot of new people. And it wasn't always the people that we met who were doing business with us, but the referrals that came. So I met a lady in Parramatta. I believe she's the group leader, Mia. Mia introduced me to a gentleman by the name of Mario. Mario became my client, his friends became my clients, and we've probably done at least a dozen podcasts or radio interviews. So as you develop your networks through BX, you're going to have these tentacles. They're like roots of a tree that spread out a long way, then they start to go really, really deep. And you're going to find yourself having a really nice network. And having that network has helped us grow throughout COVID-19. So COVID-19 came along and I had a business opportunity. I had a business opportunity in Malaysia, and I said to my wife, I said, what do I do? I said, do I go to Malaysia or do I stay home? She said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I am Daniel Danger. And she laughed because when I was wakeboarding, they'd call me Daniel Danger. And I said, well, I am Daniel Danger, so I'm going to get on the flight. So I flew from Taiwan to Malaysia, and I flew into Kuala Lumpur, and I caught the train, and it was really creepy coming through the airport. There was probably about 50 people in the airport. The last time I was there in 2012, there was tens of thousands of people in the airport. So I went through the airport, walked straight through customs, and it's like the perfect dream. If you've ever been on an international flight and then you land into a foreign destination and those lines backed up, hundreds of people long, I just went straight to the front of the queue, walked out, jumped on the train, and went into the city. The city was the same thing. I jumped on the train, nobody on the train. Got to the city, hardly anybody was in the city, and it was like zombie apocalypse. Now, my wife was ringing me every hour telling me, wear your mask, wear your mask, wear your mask. But because I had to do a stage presentation to 350 of our customers, I didn't want to wear my mask. So I spent 3 days, no mask, and then I came back to Taiwan. As I came back to Taiwan, I was the last flight in before they commenced the lockdowns. So I got in, and if I would have landed after midnight, I would have been in quarantine automatically for 14 days. But I snuck through just in time, and I went home. So after the flight, I got home, and I wanted to make sure I was going to be healthy because, you know, they're talking about COVID-19, 350 people in the room, shaking hands, having photos. And then I thought to myself, maybe I should take some extra supplements. So I went to the kitchen drawer, and there was a pink box, and it had a letter B on the front of the box, kind of like the B logo for the BX networking. So I picked up the box, and there was these pink little tablets. So B12, quite simple. So I picked up the pink tablets, and I had 2, and then I had another 2 at lunchtime, and then I had another 2 at dinner. Now, the next morning I woke up, and I was feeling really, really sick, and I had a lot of diarrhea. So I went to the bathroom and I come back and I went to the drawer and I took another 2 vitamin B tablets. After lunch, I was back in the bathroom. And so I thought I better top up on the supplements. So I went back to the drawer and had another 2 vitamin B12 tablets. And I was sick again. And I couldn't believe it. So I'm sick for 3 days and I'm looking up on the internet asking what are the signs and symptoms of COVID-19? And I've got them all. And so I said to my wife, I said, what do I do? She said, you better go to the hospital. I said, okay, I'll go to the hospital. So I got my passport, I got my ID, put my mask on, jumped in the taxi, went to the hospital. And at the hospital, they'd already started up this COVID-19 station. So there was a mobile bus at the front of the hospital, and within the bus, it had an X-ray machine and it was all quarantined. So I had to go sit in this roped-off area. They checked the temperature, they looked inside the mouth, and then I went for X-rays. After the X-rays, they marched me inside the hospital, and the doctors were wearing hazmat suits. And they sat me down and they did some blood tests. They ran the tests and I went back outside. They called me back in the hazmat suits and they said, there's nothing wrong with you. You got perfect health. And I said, well, I can't stop going to the bathroom. And they said, look, maybe you've eaten something bad on the flight. Maybe you've eaten something bad at home. Maybe it's just the food. So I got my tick of approval, clean bill of health, and I went back home. Now, I went back home and I thought, what do? I've got to have more supplements. So I was talking to my wife in the kitchen and I opened the drawer and I put 2 of these pink B12 tablets in my hand and I was about to take them. She said, Daniel, stop. I said, why? She said, what are you doing? I said, I'm taking the vitamin B12 tablets. She said, they're not B12. And I said, what are they? She said, they're my laxatives. So for 3 days straight, I've consumed 18 laxatives. Every time I went to the bathroom, I had more laxatives. Every time I ate, I had more laxatives. So what I thought was COVID-19 was just a bad case of the runs because of my wife's laxatives. So COVID-19's been fun. But what we need to do as we go through COVID-19 is we really need to take care of our mental and our emotional health. And this is the topic of today's BX Live. It's about how do you have a mental detox? How do you first of all, I cleaned my system out, got all the germs out, but how do you clean the mind? How do you change how you think? How do you change how you feel? And this is what we're going to talk about today. So if you're taking notes, let's start with having a look at what we call emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a field that has been developing over the past 30 years. You may have read some of the books by Dr. Daniel Goleman. Daniel Goleman is a Harvard professor, and he's been talking about emotional intelligence and the impact on our personal and our professional lives. But I believe emotional intelligence goes all the way back to Freudian psychology, where Freud was talking about how you take care of your emotions. So we have Daniel Goleman talking about it over the past 30 years. We have Freud talking about it all the way back then. But then before that, we had something very different to emotional intelligence. And your parents or you might have called it being street smart. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, I believe it's also being street smart because there's 5 key areas of emotional intelligence. The first pillar of emotional intelligence is what we call self-awareness. And self-awareness is your ability to understand why you think and feel the way that you do. And there's more than 7 billion people on the planet, and I can promise you everybody thinks and feels differently because we have our own personal history. We have our memories, we have our decisions, we have our beliefs, we have our attitudes. And even if you grew up with a brother or sister, life in your family was very different from your siblings compared to you because you're going to see the family in a totally different way. So the first pillar of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, and it's understanding why we think and feel the way that we do. And according to psychologists will tell us that our thoughts influence 95% of our feelings. And a lot of psychology today focuses on the feeling. But what you can do is you can focus on the root cause, which is the thought. And if you can change your thought, you don't have to worry about the feelings, because the thought influences 95% of the feelings. You take control of your thoughts and your feelings will take control of themselves. Now, if we thought about the average population in Australia right now, only about 36% of our adult population can identify their thoughts and feelings. It's a very low number. So the next question is, why is that? The reason why this is the case is that you have about 90,000 different thoughts running through your mind every single day. Imagine that. You're out there, you're waking up, you're preparing for your day, you're doing business, you're concentrating on other people, you're looking after your family, you're thinking about your future, you're reflecting on your past, and then sometimes you might even get a chance to be present in the moment. But we have about 90,000 thoughts going through our mind every day. And if you have restrictive thoughts or negative thoughts, what they do is they fire off negative emotions and negative feelings. So we have to become mindful of what we think. But what do we think about most of the time? That's the question. We've got to figure, what do we think about most of the time? So with self-awareness, it's about understanding why I think and feel the way that I do. And then we've got to learn to understand the thoughts and their impact on our feelings. Because once they impact our feelings and emotions determine the actions that we do or don't take. And people will say to you, oh, I'm procrastinating. Well, procrastination is a lack of action. And so you've got to trace it back to what were they feeling before that? And before that, what was the thought that was taking place? And if you can capture the thought, you can control the feeling, and then procrastination will never be a problem. So this is self-awareness. Now, what we know is it's not what you know that hurts you. So just remember that. It's not what you know that hurts you. It's what you don't know that hurts you. So my grandfather, a classic example, he used to hide his money under the bed. So we were travelling in New Zealand and we're travelling from the North Island to the South Island. And we left the hotel. We start to get down towards the South Island. We've travelled about 100 kilometres, and he puts his hand in his pocket to buy lunch. He's ordered the lunch. He puts his hand in the pocket. No money in the pocket. Where's the money? He left it hidden under the bed. So what we know today, it's not what we know that hurts us. It's what we don't know that hurts us. And if you have an emotional weakness, if you have a limiting belief and it's been repressed into the subconscious mind, it will still impact you and you won't be able to produce the results that you desire. So emotional intelligence starts with self-awareness. Once we have self-awareness, we then move into what's called self-regulation. Self-regulation is being able to manage your feelings. It's being able to get out of any mental or emotional rut that you find yourself in. Some people, when they get bad news, they dwell on the bad news for a few moments and then get busy again. Other people receive bad news and then they can dwell on it for a whole day. What we know is that all emotions produce a biological response in the body. So write this down. One negative emotion can interrupt you for up to 4 hours. One negative emotion, whether it be anger, frustration, shame, guilt, grief, that will impact your performance for 4 hours. So let's imagine this. I wake up in the morning and I've got BX networking and it starts at 8 a.m, but I forgot to set my alarm. I know it's going to take me half an hour to get the networking event, but I wake up at 7:30. You wake up in a state of panic and you start to get frustrated. And then what you do, you quickly do your hair and makeup, you go and jump in the car, and it's like every single bad driver is on the road in front of you today. Every slow driver is in front of you, and your emotions start to build up. You know what happens? Your face turns red. The redness starts to lift up through your chest, through your neck, up to your mouth, and all of a sudden you become hot-headed. Now, these emotions, each emotion will impact your performance for 4 hours. So if you wake up in a state of panic, that feeling of panic is going to disrupt you for 4 hours. If you then get angry and frustrated at the driver in front of you, that emotion's going to interrupt you for another 4 hours. If you miss the event or the start of it and you don't get to do your 60-second, what will happen is you'll feel disappointed. So now you've got 3 big emotions impacting your body. But the interesting thing about an emotion, it's not 1 plus 1. It's 1 times 2, 2 times 3. So by the time you have 3 emotions in your body, the multiplication effect doubles the feeling in the body. So if you have had experienced 3 negative emotions like disappointment, frustration, and anger, that's like experiencing 6 different emotions at once because it has a multiplication effect on the body. Those 3 emotions could disrupt your entire day. And what happens is there's little to no productivity and you're wrestling with those feelings. So self-regulation is about getting in and out of these moods. It's about experiencing the emotion and then quickly moving away from it so it doesn't overpower you. And self-regulation, for a lot of us, it's very difficult for us to regulate our emotions. Why is that? The reason why is that if you feel anger today, this is just today's anger, but we have what's called a gestalt. And a gestalt is essentially a chain of memories. So when you experience anger today, you will also experience the anger of every episode of anger through your entire life, all the way back to the very root cause of all of your anger. Now, if you're a mum or dad, just give me a little wave. Are you a mum or a dad? Okay. So when do your children experience the first event of anger? Well, I remember my daughter, when she came home from the hospital, we put her in the crib by herself and she went ballistic. She had her first meltdown because she was now separated from mum. Instead of being next to mum and hearing mum's heartbeat, she's in the crib all by herself and she was going ballistic. She was angry that she had been separated from mum. Now, what's interesting is in the first 3 years of your life, what you're looking for is you're looking for unconditional love from your mother. And so here she is, she's been in the hospital right next to her mum the whole time, and now she comes home and we put her in the crib. She's not happy, Jan. She's angry because she's been separated. So our first events of anger happen in the first few months of our life. What about children as they get a little bit older? As they get a little bit older, they're pre-linguistic. What pre-linguistic means is that they can't understand language. Yes, they can absorb everything, but they can't understand it. So think about your children. When they've got a wet diaper, what do? They start to moan and groan, and they feel discomfort. If they feel discomfort and you haven't recognized it, the moaning and groaning gets that. And if you don't pay any attention, they go ballistic. And so children are experiencing these emotions from a very young age. But then if you have a brother or sister, like my brother, he was a bully. He was 2 years older than me, and he'd hit me, and he could run faster than me. So I'd come over and he'd hit me, and then he would run away. And I used to get really angry. And my mum would say to him, don't make your brother angry, because when he catches you, he'll give you a good flogging. So we have all of these chains of anger. And then all of a sudden you get to school. So you start school and the kids don't play with you. What happens? You get angry. You might not externalize the anger, which most of us don't do, but we internalize it. We still feel it. Then you start to get a little bit older and it comes to year 6 and you're the person who doesn't get invited to the year 6 farewell. You don't have a date for year 6 farewell. You get angry. You get into high school, people tease you. You get angry. You learn to drive your car. There's slow drivers in front of you. You get angry. You're learning to drive a manual car. I don't know if they exist anymore, but you're popping the clutch, you're grinding the gears, and you're getting frustrated with yourself. Your first girlfriend, your first boyfriend leaves you from somebody else. You get angry. And then it just continues. So the reason why I'm telling you this is that the anger that you feel today is also connected to all the other events of anger that you've ever experienced. So why does anger have a big impact on us? Because there's hundreds of events that are connected to this. So this is fascinating. Now, if we go a little bit out of this realm of modern day psychology and we start to incorporate the Eastern model of psychology from China and Japan, and we even incorporate Ayurvedic healing from India, we will now learn that emotions can also be passed down through the genealogical bloodline. Now, Western medicine and Western science can now identify emotions that have been passed down through 4 generations. So sometimes, and I can see the heads nodding, you wake up in your 40s or your 50s and you say to yourself, God, I've become just like my mother. I always told myself I'd never be like my mother, but all of a sudden I am. So the emotions can be passed down through 4 generations. But in the Eastern world, they also believe that emotions can be passed down through past lives. That may be outside of your beliefs, but some people believe it, and we can't prove if it's true or false. But let's say you had a traumatic death in your past life and you're angry about it, and you brought that soul energy into this life, you carry the anger. So very fascinating. So when it comes to self-regulation, how do we regulate a lifetime of anger? How do we regulate a lifetime of sadness? How do we regulate our fears? And so this is about having a mental detox. And the purpose of having a mental detox is getting rid of the root cause of anger. You know, if you understand Western medicine, oftentimes in Western medicine, we're looking at the symptomology. We're looking at the surface structure of the problem. What Band-Aid can we put on that? What pill can we take? But in Eastern mythologies, we're looking at what is the root cause. If we can solve the root cause, all the symptomology will disappear. If you're a tennis player or if you've ever played tennis, you might get tennis elbow. But if you're playing tennis and you've had tennis elbow for a long time, you soon realize through a little bit of coaching, it's little to do with the elbow and more to do with your full swing. It's more to do with your hips, your knees, and your foot placement. And so through a good coach in tennis, they'll help you change your body position and the tennis elbow magically disappears. So we've got to learn new methods and new ideas and new strategies on how to overcome the root cause of these mental and emotional blockages. And I can promise you what you're dealing with today, what you're struggling with today, has nothing to do with today. It's to do with the root cause in the first event. So once we can deal with the root cause, once we can have that mental detox, we move into the third pillar of emotional intelligence. The third pillar of emotional intelligence is motivation. This is not the Tony Robbins jump up and down rah-rah type of motivation. It's not that. I'm opposed to that because I don't think my customers want to see me jumping up and down and firing off my anchor in BX networking or in an event. No, motivation is about resiliency. It's about falling down and getting back up. There's an old Japanese proverb that says, fall down 7 times, get back up 8 times. And I know that none of you are new to business. You're seasoned veterans, and sometimes the best strategy in business is resilience. And we call this the principle of the last man or last lady standing. And sometimes you can't knock over your competitors. You've got the same products, you've got the same service, you're selling it to the same customers, you're doing all these magical things. But still at the end of the day, it's the same price, they can get it from across the street. We live in a bit of a Me Too world. So how do you succeed? Well, the principle of the last man standing says if you can just keep your door open for 1 day longer than your competition, you will win all the business. And I know this to be true because my parents were in pawn, broking. They were licensed second-hand dealers. And we had dozens of competitors coming in to our catchment area. We had a catchment area of 45,000 people. There was a new competitor coming in every 2 years. All we had to do was keep our doors open for 1 day longer. We had to have the resiliency. As my mum said, we had to tighten the belts. We had to go without. And eventually, we just kept our doors open longer than anybody else, and we won all of the business. But it takes resiliency. It's about getting knocked down and getting back up. Motivation is also stepping outside of your comfort zone. And I'll tell you what, COVID-19 is pretty comfortable. I can sleep in. I don't have to go up as early as I did before. I don't have to travel. There's all these things that I don't have to do anymore. But what's happening is I'm creating another comfort zone. And I know in a couple of months, maybe a couple of years, the world's going to change again, and I'm going to be in a comfort zone. So what I've got to do now is I've got to already live outside of my comfort zone. And this is very hard. It's very hard because mums and dads, you know this. You know about homeostasis. You know that your children, the body temperature's got to be around about, we'll call it 37 degrees. And what happens, mums? Mums, what happened? The children get hot and they get a fever. And they go into what's called a hyperprexic state. A hyperprexic state is when the body starts to heat up. And if the body heats up by more than 10%, the body can cook. And eventually the brain can overheat and shut down. So once the body increases its temperature by about 10%, we've got to be very careful because after 10%, you can die. And so this is a hyperprexic state. So what do, mums? We try to cool the children back down. We take a couple of layers of clothing off them. We get some lukewarm water and we pat them down until their body returns back to homeostasis, which is about 37 degrees. And once they're 37 degrees, what do? Whew, husband, get me a white wine. I need a drink. And so we get the children back to the comfort zone. What about if your children get really cold? What happens if the body temperature starts to drop? What happens if they've been in a really cold pool or they've been down there at Cronulla and the ocean temperature is really cold and they get caught out in a rip? What happens is the body temperature drops. And if the body temperature drops by about 10%, the body starts to go into a hyperthermic state. If the body goes from 37 degrees down to about 33 degrees and it stays too cold for too long, the body can freeze and it can die. So what do? We get the children out of the water and we wrap them up in a space blanket. It looks like alfoil, and you wrap them up and you steadily bring their body temperature back up to homeostasis, back into the comfort zone. Interesting, isn't it? Temperature goes up, we come back down to the comfort zone. Temperature drops, we bring it back up to the comfort zone. But as adults, what do? We get into our own comfort zones. Our comfort zone can be the number of BX events that we do. It can be the people that we sit beside every 2 weeks. Well, I'm comfortable with this person, I know them, so I'm just going to sit next to this person. It's a comfort zone. The opportunity to do your webinars or your guest speak for the day comes up, but you sit in the back of the room and you hide away. This is all an example of a comfort zone. We can have income comfort zones, but you will call it a glass ceiling. You'll say, I've got this income glass ceiling. I can't make it past 100,000. I can't make it past 500,000. I'm stuck. But this is just your comfort zone. This is your homeostasis. So what I've learned over the years is that our personal comfort zone is in a vicinity of around about 10%. Now, if your income goes from $100,000 to $110,000, your income has gone up by $10,000. And if you don't have a strategic plan, if you don't have a personal plan for what you're going to do with the extra money, what do? Husband, wife, I've got extra money. Let's spend it. New couch, new kitchen, new cars, new wheels, new stereo, paint the house, change the carpets. But all of a sudden you've spent the extra $10,000, but your expenses have risen to meet your new income. Now, my first job was a paper boy, and I used to earn $2 on the weekend. And after the weekend, I had no money left. At 17, I worked at a go-kart track, and I earned $50. Now, after I put fuel in my car, bought my lunch, and had a couple of beers with my mates, I had no money. But imagine that, I'm making 25 times the money, but I've still got no money. Interesting, isn't it? And then I had my first job in hospitality, and I was making about $500 a week. At the end of the week, how much money did I have in my pocket? None. And then my best one ever, I had some clients in my consulting business. They paid me $5,000 to consult their business for 90 minutes. How much money did I have at the end of the 90 minutes? I spent it all. So what happens is we get into these comfort zones. And if our income goes 10% out of what we're accustomed to, we go into what's called self-sabotaging behavior. We start to spend it. And if you have a look at the statistics, the average Australian at the age of 40 has a net worth of about $1,000. Imagine that after 20 years of working, the average Australian has a net worth of $1,000. If you also have a look at some of the other statistics today, the average household debt in Australia exceeds $176,000. But imagine that. These people are earning 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times more than their first job, but they're still in their comfort zone because there's no plan. So if we earn more money, we go into self-sabotaging behaviour. What happens if our incomes drop? Well, if it drops, remember the body temperature drops, we go into a hypothermic state. And what do? We try to warm the body back up to get back into the comfort zone. So this is what I've been seeing. I've been seeing very successful people going out and driving Uber. Holy moly, my income's gone from $100,000 down to $90,000. What do? I drive Uber. Quickly get my income back up to $100,000. And what do? Then they stop driving Uber. They're back into the comfort zone. And what happens here, this is called scrambling behaviour. A lot of people are using scrambling behaviours, but in the wrong areas. They're scrambling, they're finding extra things to sell, they're finding ways to discount to get the same people to buy more, but only to get their income back up to where it was before. So throughout our lives, we have to fight this comfort zone. And remember, as soon as you start to hit that barrier of about 10%, you'll start to either self-sabotage by overspending, or if it drops, you'll start to scramble just to get it back up. So where does this comfort zone come from? Your comfort zone was created at a time when you were most unconscious. See, when I grew up in a family where we're not rich. That's what my mum would say. We're not rich people. Your father's just a concreter. I'm just a hairdresser. We're not educated like those people. It's okay for them. They work for a corporate. We're just self-employed. We don't have a money tree out the back. We can't afford those shoes. We don't drive expensive cars. And so the first 7 years of your life, we call this the download period. And what we're struggling with today is what we downloaded from our parents before the age of 7. And so what happened to me, I'd been successful. I was working. I was living in Dubai. I had almost $100,000 in the bank. I think it was about $90,000 at the time. Good saver. And I got married. And all of a sudden, I changed. I got married and I turned into my mother. I couldn't believe it. And my wife would say to me, husband, can you take me out to the movies tonight? I'd say, can't afford it. We're not rich people. She'd say, can we go out for dinner? Can't afford it. We're not rich people. Let's eat at home. Can we invite some friends over? As long as they bring their own food. If you're an Australian family, this is what happens. If you're in a European family, you'd never ask anybody to bring food to your house. But I started to sound like my mother. Then I started to say this key word. Sweetheart, we've got to tighten our belts. We've got to tighten the belts. She said, what is that? And I said, I don't know. I said, I got no idea. She said, are you losing weight? Do you need new pants? I said, no, but we've got to tighten the belts. We're not rich people. We can't afford it. We're only cabin crew. We've got to save for the future. And then I realised I'd become just like my mother. And if you've ever read the Bible, it says the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. It also says the sins of the father become the sins of the son. And all of this learned behaviour, I started to adapt and I started to replicate in my own life. And my wife, and God bless her, she said, husband, you need help. And so I rang my mum and I said, Mum, can you answer me this question? I said, Mum, I keep saying to Ninny, but I've got to tighten my belts. And it's like I've heard this from you. She said, yeah, I used to say that to you all the time. I said, why is that? She said, because when it was the 80s, early 90s, we went through a recession and we couldn't afford this and that. And so now I start to think there was actually a very logical reason why Mum said we couldn't afford things back then. We're going through a bloody recession. How does a 9-year-old comprehend what a recession is? But the external world was imprinting on me. I was downloading all of this. And I said, Mum, why would you tell me that? Like, where did you come up with that? And she said, well, your grandmother used to say it to me. And so she said, why don't you ring your grandmother? And so I rang grandmother. I said, grandmother, I'm married. You've been over to Dubai, and I keep sounding like my mother. I keep saying, I've got to tighten my belt. And Mum said that. She said it to me, and then Mum said that you said it to her. I said, why did you say it to Mum? She said, well, sweetheart, she said, my father and your great-grandmother, they had 6 children together, and we lived in a very small house in Armidale. And it was a big family, 6 children back then. And it was only your great-grandfather that worked. We didn't have a lot of money. And I said, okay, but obviously you're still alive today. And she said, well, yes, but he left our family. He walked away from your great-grandmother and 6 children, and he started a new life with a new family. Your great-grandmother didn't work. We had no money. And so your great-grandmother used to say to us, tighten the belts. And I thought about that. This same thing, remember I mentioned before, scientists have discovered that emotions can be passed down through 4 generations. Here I am over here, and I'm repeating the sins of my mother. I'm repeating her words. I go back and Mum says, yes, your grandmother said that to me. I asked grandmother and she said her mother used to say it to her. So this chain of limitations, there's this comfort zone within our family that says we can't afford it. So I'm 32 and I've got to ask myself, is this the legacy I want to leave for my children? Is this the legacy I want to leave? Do I want my daughter ringing me when she's 30 saying, Dad, I'm married and I keep saying to my husband, we've got to tighten the belts. Is that the legacy I want to leave? Is that the bloodline? Is that the lineage that I want? Well, the answer is no. So we've got to work on our motivation and we have to navigate outside of that comfort zone. And it can be challenging because it's not your comfort zone. It's probably your mother's, your grandmother's, and your great-grandmother's. And you've got to force your way out of that. And remember, as soon as you hit 10% outside of your comfort zone, you start to sweat, you start to get hot, and what happens is you want to get back to where it's comfortable. But all success, all of your future success is going to be outside of your comfort zone. And so you've got to do whatever it takes to get outside of the comfort zone. Now, the 4th pillar of emotional intelligence is what we call social awareness. Social awareness is being able to look at other people and understand why they think and feel the way that they do. It's understanding what's important to this person. What do they value? What's happening in their life? And you've got to get to this stage where you have to be able to look at people and read them from the outside without having to ask them. Because what I've learned in business is if you ask a really good question in business, then people assume that you know the answer. So imagine a doctor. You go and see the doctor and the doctor takes you through a 3-step process. An examination, a diagnostic, and then he offers a prescription. And as soon as the doctor starts asking you about your signs and symptoms, you're convinced he or she knows what she's talking about. Is that correct? As soon as the doctor puts on the schmock, that's the white coat, puts the stethoscope in the ears, you assume competency. So what does this mean for you? If you can read the mental or emotional makeup of other people, and you have a very good sales process, and we call this a consultative approach. If you can ask people very important and very well thought through questions, the fact that you ask that question, they assume competence and assume that you already know the answer to the question that you ask them. And so in social awareness, you have to become very attuned to your clients. Now, we also call that empathy. The 5th pillar of emotional intelligence is what we call is social regulation. Social regulation is being able to persuade people. It's your ability to convince people. It's your ability to demonstrate your product and service in a way that they understand the benefits, the results, the improvements, and the transformations that they're going to get from using your product. People don't care what your product is. They only care what it does for them. Each customer asks, what's in it for me? And so if you can look at that person, social awareness, and figure out what they need, and then improve your social regulation and say this is exactly the benefits that they require, you can then show the client what it will do for them. And that's all people care about. What does it do? And how can it improve my life? So these are the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence. The first one is self-awareness. You've got to understand why you think and feel the way that you do. And what I'd encourage you to do is to make a diary. What just triggered me off? What was the trigger? And what was the first thought that I had? After I had that thought, how did I feel? What was the emotion? And what action did I take or fail to take as a result? And what you can quickly do is you can quickly learn about how your thoughts impact your feelings. Now, there's something magical here. When it comes to self-regulation, the way that your unconscious mind works is your unconscious mind will present to you memories for resolution. It'll bring up old memories up to the surface and say, hey, knock, 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 who's home? Here's an old memory. But what do? We get this old memory and we go, I don't want to deal with that. Reminds me of my first lover. And we push it back under the rug. But what happens is if we bring it up to the surface and we acknowledge it, simply acknowledging these old painful memories is enough to resolve them and make them rational, and they disappear. But what do? I don't like how it feels, and I push it back under the rug, and then I have a whole bag of emotional baggage and I carry it around with me everywhere I go. But what you do is you become aware of it, and awareness is enough to regulate it. So the second pillar of emotional intelligence is regulation, self-regulation. And remember that one negative emotion will impact you for 4 hours, but then it has a multiplication effect after that. The third pillar of emotional intelligence is motivation. And remember what the Japanese say, fall down 7 times, get back up 8 times. And in business today and in COVID-19, you can just apply the principle of the last man or woman standing. If you can keep your doors open for just 1 day longer than your competitor, you'll win all the business. And I know this is working for me. I just acquired 440 new clients. I have another 500 clients lined up for my next training. I will train an additional 1,000 people this year over last year, because what's happening is my competitors have disappeared, and all I'm doing is keeping my doors open 1 day longer, and I'm reaping all of the rewards. I'm not any smarter. I don't have anything different to them. We're selling the same products and services to the same people, but the other people just don't exist anymore. They've still got to buy it, and my doors are open. So you've got to get outside of that comfort zone. Just keep pushing, even if you have to go without, even if you have to put some of your future goals on hold for a little bit longer, but you can keep your doors open for another day. Ultimately, you'll succeed. The fourth pillar of emotional intelligence is social awareness, which is empathy. And today, we need to have higher levels of empathy. And the interesting thing is that in business is if you can increase your levels of emotional intelligence, on average, you will earn an additional $39,500 more than your closest competitors. Imagine that. If you increase your level of emotional intelligence, this has been researched in every industry around the world. If you can have a higher level of emotional intelligence, on average, you'll earn $39,500 more than your nearest competitor. Because what does your customer ask? Do you understand me? Do you know what it feels like to be me? Have you walked a mile in my shoes? And if you can utilize your skills of empathy and you can associate and imagine what it would be like for that person, most people just want to be understood. And Oprah Winfrey, you've probably heard of Oprah Winfrey, she has interviewed the richest people in the world, the most successful people in the world in all of their fields. And what she says after the end of every single interview, all of the people that she's interviewed lean across and look at her and say, did I do okay? And see, she's skilled with empathy because she understands the emotional makeup of other people. And then the fifth pillar of emotional intelligence is social regulation. Once you understand how people feel, now you've got to communicate. I understand how you feel. This is what you're thinking about. This is how it's impacting your feelings. These are the actions that you're taking and you're failing to take. And this is how it's impacting your entire life. And they'll look at you and go, my husband doesn't get me, but you do. So here's an open check. Just tell me what I've got to write on it. And so you've got to become persuasive. And we have to be able to persuade people with their own logic. You know, I want you to take away one thing. And even if it's just this, there's an old saying that a man convinced against his own will is of the same opinion still. A man convinced against his own will is of the same opinion still. And that's self-regulation. It's about being able to help people persuade themselves and make a great decision based on what's happening in their life. So this is the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence. And if you just systematically improve each one of these areas by 1 point, if you improve your emotional intelligence by 1 point, you'll see a corresponding increase in your income of $1,750. This is the worldwide average. This is for people who aren't as intelligent as you, by the way. You're much more intelligent. Your business owners, a 1 point increase for you could be an extra $5,000 or $6,000 worth of sales. So emotional intelligence If you utilize this through COVID-19, I believe you'll be the last man or woman standing, and you'll win all the business. So thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to share these ideas with you. And if any of you would like to learn more personally, you're more than welcome to reach me through the BX network, catch up with me on Facebook, or write to me personally, daniel@danieltolson.com.